Welcome back to Uncle Mervin's Heritage Attic. And we've got another story today about some of the things that you can see around here. One of them's down here beside me on this big old chest. And the other one is this thing up here. Now, what I want to show you, this is another little old book. Now, this is a very precious little old book. It's so precious, it's kept inside these covers. It's a little book of somebody's visions that God gave to him. Can any of you guess whose visions they might be? Yes?
Ellen White?
I thought you might guess Ellen White, but no. Can any of you read the name? Yes? It's William Foy. William Foy was a Millerite Adventist, and God actually, to his great surprise, gave him 4 visions. 2 of them about the judgment that was coming that William Miller was talking about. And God wanted him to go out and tell these visions to people. But William Foy was afraid to do it. William Foy was a black man, and he knew, sad to say, that some white people aren't very respectful to black people. That's why he was afraid to go and tell his visions. But William Foy was a grand man. He loved God, and he loved people. And so he went out and started to tell the people the things that God had told him. And I'm glad to tell you that the people loved to hear him preach. They crowded in to hear him, and he had a good time. And then, after a while, God gave the person you named a minute ago, Ellen. They called her Sister Ellen when she was a teenager. Did you know that? When she got married, they called her Sister White. And when she was older, they called her Mother White, because she was like a nice mother. Well, when she was a teenager, you know, Sister Ellen began to have some vision. And she was afraid to tell them to people because she was just a teenager, and she thought people would laugh at her. But one of the first times that she told her visions, William Foy was there. And William Foy heard Sister Ellen telling her stories that God had shown her. And William Foy stood up in the meeting and he said, "Praise God, it's just what he showed me." And he went up at the end of the meeting, great big fine man that he was, and stood there beside little Ellen. She was little. She was 17, but she was scarcely over 5 feet tall. This big man and this little young woman, and he was such an encouragement to her. God used William Foy to encourage Ellen as well as to tell his own stories. Say, do you know how much Ellen loved people when she was a girl? Even when Ellen was 13 and 14 years old, if she noticed somebody that didn't love Jesus, it bothered her. And at nighttime, when her twin sister, Elizabeth, did you know she had a twin sister? When her twin sister was asleep, Ellen would sneak out of bed and kneel down beside the bed and pray for this friend of hers or this somebody she'd met, that somehow God would help that person come to know Jesus the way she did and love him too. Sometimes, because Ellen really loved people, she would pray almost all night. And then soon she would ask her mother for permission to go and see that person. And one of Ellen's sisters, maybe not Elizabeth, maybe Sarah or Mary, would go with her to that person's house, and Ellen would talk about Jesus, maybe for hours, until each one of these people fell in love with Jesus too. Ellen really loved Jesus. Well, I told you after she got married, they called her Sister White. You all know that. Sometimes today we call her Ellen White, but when she was alive, nobody called her Ellen White. They called her Mrs. White or Sister White. So since we're pretending we're living back in old times, we'll call her Sister White, okay? One day, and I think you know some of this story, but maybe I could tell you some things about the story you don't know. Sister White was shown by God some people who were believers but were giving up their faith, and that she ought to go soon and help them love Jesus again. And oh, she wanted to go because that's the kind of person she was. But she couldn't go right away. This was in November in Illinois, and there was 150 miles between where she was and where those people were, and the weather had been horrible, and the roads, which were not paved, were muddy, deep muddy, almost all the way. There was no way anybody could go there. And oh, she prayed, "Dear God, I want to go soon. Please help us to go soon." And in the night, she woke up, and she looked out the window, and she saw something happening. And she turned around to her husband, woke him up. "James, God is helping us. We can go today." What's happening? It's snowing. What did that mean? If it was snowing, it meant the mud would freeze because it would get cold, and then they could go in a sled over the frozen roads. And so that very day, they started out, James and Ellen, and two ministers who lived there, Josiah Hart and Elon Everts. And they got in their vehicle to go the 150 miles while the snow was coming down and coming down and coming down. What kind of vehicle was it? Was it a Mercedes-Benz? Was it a Porsche? Was it a Cadillac? Was it a nice carriage? Was it a wagon? What was it? It was a sleigh, an open sleigh. It was simply a box. It only went up so high and had two long pieces of wood underneath it for runners and horses to pull it. And they started out in the snow, cold. You ever been in the car when it's cold and somebody lets the window down and the cold air comes down, and you say, "Hey, why don't you please roll the window up?" Supposing Ellen had said to James, "James, will you please roll the window up?" Would that have helped? No, because they were in a big open box with the snow coming down on them. Ellen had bad lungs. She should have been home where it was warm. But she loved people so much, she was willing to risk getting sick. She did have something kind of warm to snuggle up under. You've heard about a buffalo robe? Well, there, can you see that? Now, I know all of you have seen a buffalo robe before, but any buffalo robe you've seen before has been worn by a buffalo, right? But this one used to be worn by a buffalo. And afterwards, you can touch it if you like. If you notice inside, it's got a nice warm blanket inside. So I expect this was really warm to snuggle in, but it still wouldn't be like being in your house, would it? It took them some time to reach the Mississippi River, which they had to cross. In warm weather, people went across the Mississippi River in a ferry boat. In cold weather, they went across the Mississippi just walking over on the ice. Something had gone wrong. From the moment they started out until they got there, the weather began to warm up again a little bit. By the time they got to the Mississippi River, it wasn't quite frozen, and it wasn't quite unfrozen. As they got close to it, they said to people, "Say, know any place we can get across the Mississippi?" And the people would say, "There's no place you can get across now. It's too dangerous. Don't try it." "Hey, fella, you know how we can get across the Mississippi?" "No way, there's no place you can get across. Wait until the weather gets cold again." And so they came to the banks of the Mississippi River, and Josiah Hart, who was holding the reins, stopped the horses at the edge of the icy waters, or the watery ices. Can you see quarter of a mile to half a mile across? Water there flowing around the ice. You don't know where the thick places are? What does your mother tell you when the ice isn't really frozen? She says stay away from that, doesn't she? But Sister Ellen White, she felt impressed that God wanted them to get there quick. And she wanted to go because she loved people. And Josiah Hart, who was holding the horses, turned around and said, "Is it on to Iowa or back to Illinois?" And Sister White said, "In the name of the God of Israel," she was all covered up with a buffalo robe, but she had her head out. "In the name of the God of the Red Sea, let's go forward." So the horses started moving forward. Plunk, splash, plunk, splash, plunk, splash. And the sled comes sort of sliding, slithering on. And some of the water comes up inside the bottom of it. Would you be wondering where the thick places were? Would you? Trying to dodge the thin places? You know, water can be pretty thin. You can go right through it. People began to gather on the other side to watch, and on this side to watch, to see if they'd go under. Well, I'm happy to tell you that they didn't go under. They got across. But now it was late on Friday afternoon, and they needed a hotel. You know, with a nice hot shower and everything comfortable. They didn't have hotels like that in those days. They did find a hotel. The bathroom, of course, was at the end of a little trail out through the snow behind. You know what I mean? Yes. But they had a nice big fire blazing in the lobby. And James White was a good singer. And he led all the guests at the hotel in singing fine Christian songs. And then he preached to them a while. And they had a good time. And they stayed there all day Sabbath and Saturday night. And then Sunday morning, they started out again, only to find that the weather had got colder and colder and colder. Do you like cold weather? I don't. Cold weather hurts me. It actually pains me. It makes me start crying in just a few minutes if I'm really cold. And this was cold. Wind whistling over the Iowa prairies and cutting into their faces like knives. Josiah Hart would look over Elon Eberts and say, "Elon, your nose is turning white. You better rub it." And Elon Eberts would look back at Josiah Hart and say, "Your ear's turning white. You better rub it." Cold. Ellen should have been at home in a nice warm house. The buffalo robe snuggled up was hardly enough to keep her warm. And in a whole day's traveling, they only managed to go 25 miles. They still had 75 more miles to go. And no more hotels. They'd have to ask a farmhouse if they found a farmhouse, if there was some room for them to stay. And one night the people said, "Well, we don't really have much room for you, but you can stay out here on the porch." Was there any heat there? No. You ever been really cold when you go to bed? How long does it take to get your feet warm? Oh, it's cold. Do you know that one of those days, on the way to walk on Iowa, all the food they got was one apple? And so they were both hungry and cold. All day Sunday, all day Monday, all day Tuesday, until Wednesday afternoon to go 100 miles, that's all, in that cold, cold weather. But they went there because they loved people, and Ellen loved people, and she wanted to tell them that Jesus loved them, and to ask them to open up their hearts and let Jesus come inside again. And they had some wonderful meetings, and they had a great time, and when they left a few days later, everybody was rejoicing in Jesus because Ellen and the others loved people so much, just like William Foy loved people so much. Remember that when you hear about the prophets. They were people who loved people. And so that's our last story for this time. But I hope you'll all come back again sometime to Uncle Mervin's Heritage Attic, so we can have some more stories about some of the things that we've got in here. Okay?